Hello and welcome to Paint by Blunders. Now you may or may not know, a few months ago I did a video on the Creality A1 Falcon to use as a sort of tool for making stuff in the hobby for miniature wargaming, like some objective markers, some tokens to help you remember things for your army, and some very basic terrain. Now, one of the things you may not know about me is I'm a massive D&D nut, and for the first time just before Christmas, I hosted my first one-shot as a DM, whereas normally I'm just a player. And what I wanted to do was have an evolving sort of table or room layout sort of system, where as my players were working through it, they could build onto it and I would add what they see as they go. And using the Creality A1 Falcon was a godsend, and essentially all I did was make some really simple tiles. They're sort of 1 inch square, so you know it works really well with bases for miniatures and such. And I did it on this really nice and super cost-effective white laminated MDF. You could, if you wanted to, just use it on the dirty side, but I chose to do it on the white side. And also where it's got a painted finish, it is technically primed, so you could paint straight on top of this as well. But anyway, let's have a quick look at how I did it in the program. So this is the Creality app. Super easy, super clean, all free. Big fan of this. And this is sort of how I did it. I literally just made a small rectangle. I wasn't too concerned about the size because up here you could adjust it. And I unlinked it just because when it links to start off with, it can get a bit tricky. So I just did it as 26mm by 26mm. Slightly over 1 inch, yes I know, but it's just so potentially I could just see those edging around the rim of a base. And all I did was do that. And you could copy and paste it and line it up and sort of make out your grid this way. But if you're used to this program, you can do this lovely little thing called an array, and you can use a grid array. Now this will essentially grid out your design. It doesn't have to be a rectangle. Whatever you dial in, it can do this. It just makes it more efficient if you're doing things like keyrings and such. And what you can do, you can choose the amount of rows and columns, but you can also adjust the spacing between them. Now for us doing like a flooring pattern, I kept it at 0.5 just to try and sort of thicken up those edges, but you could also make it bigger if you wanted to, you know, have a really clear, distinct pattern, of which I want to tell the machine to cut a offset around the edge of it. Again, super simple, and we'll get into that. But first I want to make sure that the machine knew the material. Now you could just dial in the settings that you know, but it also has these predetermined sort of library of materials that you can add your own to. But I've put this as a 3mm sort of wood plank, and you can adjust it from there, but I found this setting works absolutely fine. And like I said, we wanted to cut around it. We want it to look nice and neat. So what we're going to use is the offset effect tool. And I'm going to put it as 1mm to just give it a nice little edge. And I'm going to tell it to curve the corners as well. And as you can see, it gives you this lovely little curve, 1mm around the edge of all of this sort of grid work. Fantastic. And all I'm going to do is tell it to cut that shape as opposed to line engrave it, because we need it to go through the wood, obviously. Super simple, and that is essentially done. You have loads of different ways to sketch this out, but I was using it to use up offcuts of wood that I had before and just essentially making tiles to fit those offcuts, because underneath where it says Creality Falcon on the top, there is a camera there, so you can really easily line up where you're going to lay out these sort of tiles and really, you know, get as little waste as we can, because I do appreciate we are in a hobby that has a lot of waste product, whether it be wood, plastic, and all sorts of, you know, resin, etc. So using up offcuts is a big win for me. So one of the things you have to really be aware of when you're messing around with materials like this is that it gives off horrible nasties that you shouldn't be breathing in, which comes to one of the reasons why I really like the Falcon, is because you can adjust the settings for how much the sort of exhaust fan is drawing out. Now, when I'm cutting MDF, I put it on 100%. I want it sucking all of that crap out, and I want it gone straight out my window through the hose. And that is brilliant. While I was in here, yes, you should have a respirator on, but while I was in my little studio space, I'll be completely honest, I didn't, and I couldn't smell it, I couldn't see it. The air was completely clear. So when I was sketching these out, I had it planned that they could be all put together in a certain way and have one big sort of plain rectangle that you could create anything you want on, instead of having corridors and rooms, etc. Again, you can put them together in any combination you like, but I completely forgot how to put them together to make the one big rectangle. So I made some sort of arrowhead room with a little offshoot room and made it a little bit more quirky as my example of how you could use it for your boss fight. So as you may notice, not everything on here is clearly laser cut. I've got some 3D printed miniatures and also some 3D printed terrain pieces. Now the miniatures are all resin 3D printed, but the bases I did laser cut. And one of the reasons why I did that is because if any of you sort of resin 3D print, having something like a base, the amount of times, unless my machine is dialed in really well, will warp slightly. And also it's just, for me, how I paint bases for D&D, I look at it as a bit of a waste of resin when I can just laser cut them and just, you know, paint them, flock them, do whatever I need. So I really like laser cutting my bases. Also, some of the things like these columns, the walls, the doors, the bookshelves, and the doors do work, by the way. So you can pull them out, so when people sort of run through and close the door again, were all sort of FDM printed in PLA, which is like the easy entry plastic 3D printing. Super easy, not very complicated at all. Files are online and you just sort of click print and go. And they were all printed on my Creality A1. Now you can also do other quirky oh, sod off. No, thank you. Obviously there are other things you can use your laser cutter for. For instance, I have this gorgeous dice tray, painted by Blunders, which the leather was cut on the laser as well, and the actual wood was cut on it, and it's just been sanded at the edges and given a bit of wood stain, and it looks really fantastic and is so satisfying to use. And I'm sure you could buy these sort of tiles online, but I really enjoyed making them and just designing stuff on my own. It's just stuff I love doing. I love designing and working out how I can use something to, you know, elevate my hobby experience, especially if I get to share it with other people, you know, stuff like this when we got a, you know, a full party, everyone's there. It is fantastic and I really enjoy it. So while I was getting all this ready, I kept thinking, what other accessories can I make myself that I will use in the hobby, whether it be wargaming or D&D, and a dry palette. Super easy, super effective, and they do work quite well. Essentially, it's just some laser cut MDF. That's all it is. Don't be told that anything more special than that. That is what they are, but I like my little quirky motif of a brush goblin because that is exactly what I am, and I have so many brushes for so many different things. Honestly, there's so much more you could use the Falcon to laser cut for you on this that I have 3D printed. The doors you could certainly do, the walls, the bookshelves, anything like that, even the pillars, could all be just laser cut. It would be super simple to dial in, but I just have the luxury, and I appreciate it is very much a luxury to have a 3D printer and this cutter as well. So I like dancing between the different tech. I hope you enjoyed that little look into the Creality A1 Falcon and how you may or may not use it for sort of hobby stuff like D&D. Now this isn't a sponsored video, this is just me creating a video because I love doing stuff like this and using tech and these tools to create things for my hobby that I really enjoy, because as much as I really enjoy playing it, the creative side of it of just designing stuff and printing it, or designing stuff and cutting it, even something as basic as making tiles that are inch square, I really enjoy. I really dig it. I love all stuff like that. And I hope you enjoyed, you know, seeing some things that you may or may not do. You may not even ever entertain the idea of using a laser, but I think they're great fun. Anyway, thank you very much, and hopefully I'll see you on the next one.